in pricing has reversed, and the only thing left is for the Fed not to blink too early, because there is no good reason in their minds, in my opinion, that they should ease back. They should keep rates up. But I certainly don't believe that there's going to be a March increase. My personal feeling is that this is going to be it for now.
I don't know. They just said ongoing rate increases will still be. By the way, the Dow's down about 400 points right now. David Kelly, no, I should say Jim, actually, we promised to turn to you. What are your kind of knee-jerk reactions here? What jumps out to you?
Yeah, so look, I think that another hike in March is probably on order. I think it's going to be very important to hear what they say in the press conference, in the sense that wage inflation, the tightness in the labor market, I think is what's concerning them the most. It's service sector inflation, and one of the biggest feed-ins to higher prices and wages, obviously, clearly is the tightness in the labor market. So this needs to be addressed. And I think the way the Fed is reading this is they're saying that, look, the terminal rate is not a done deal yet. We're still going to debate whether it's 5 or even 5.25%. And what they're trying to avoid is a type 2 error where they don't do enough right now when they've got inflation on the run, and then all of a sudden inflation starts to resurge again later this year, and then they have to restart their cycle, and that hurts markets more.
I'm going to go to Bob now, and then I'm going to come back to you, David Kelly, and remind David of something he said that has stuck in my head since before this rate tightening cycle began. But Bob, we were at 300 points down on the Dow as we headed into this result. Right now, we are down 367. How are stocks reacting? It would seem sort of they got what they expected.
Yeah, ongoing increase is appropriate. I think doesn't surprise anybody down here. The big debate right now, and you see that the S&P's lost about 5 points, 6 points maybe since this started. But the debate here is just how much more hawkish can Powell possibly sound? He's made it pretty clear where he stands on this. They're going to keep raising rates. They're going to keep them higher for longer. The market thinks they've got 1, maybe 2 small rate increases, and then they're going to cut rates by the end of the year. Fed futures are 4.5%. Not at 5 or 5 1/8. So who's right? The Fed apologists constantly say, don't fight the Fed. But I talk to bond market people. They've got their own cliches out there. And one of the ones I hear from the bond market guys is the Federal Reserve tells the market when it's going to raise rates, but the market tells the Fed when it's going to cut rates. And right now, the bet is exactly what David said, that the Fed is going to introduce some kind of recession that's going to force them to acknowledge that and cut rates later in the year. That's what the bond market says. And FOMC is 12 people, but the bond market is more than 12 million people. And that's one of the reasons I tend to spend a lot of time talking to the bond market guys at this point. So you see the dollar up right here and pretty modest reaction on the S&P.
David, before this whole rate tightening cycle began, I remember you specifically saying that typically, the Fed starts too late, goes too high, and stays too long. I assume that you would stick by that statement and say that that's exactly what, in your view, the Fed is doing now.
Exactly. I mean, they say that they acknowledge the long lags by which monetary policy affects the economy, but with inflation coming down, with consumption spending falling, with industrial production falling, they're still raising rates. So, that's obviously waiting too long. And, on inflation, inflation's not going to get going again. Even I get it that energy prices picked up a little bit in January. OK, but by the middle of this year, rent, instead of being a headwind, is going to be a tailwind. It's going to be pushing inflation down. So I think, at the middle of this year, we're going to be somewhere with a 3 handle on inflation. Middle of next year, 2 handle or lower. We could eventually we're going to end up with inflation below 2%, and the Federal Reserve is going to be trying to push it back up again. And there's no need to get into a recession in between now and then.
But you think that cruise ship that you talked about before the top, you think the ship's going to hit the dock?
Yeah, at the moment, yes. Unfortunately, I think it is. I mean, there's just so much pressure on this economy, particularly on consumers. There are a lot of lower and middle income consumers who had money through the pandemic because of government aid. They racked up credit card debt last year to try to stave off the tough day where they're going to have to cut back. Now they're going to cut back. And with exports being hurt by a high dollar, with housing being crushed by high interest rates, that's enough to push this economy into recession, even if the Fed did nothing at this stage. And if the Fed keeps on tightening, then it just makes it worse.
Does anyone on our panel, including you, Steve, you, Bob, does anyone want to agree with Rick that this is it?